Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Hello and welcome back to Counsel Culture. This week I am delighted to be joined by a potentially familiar name to some of you. Alex Novarese used to be editor at Legal Business before moving over to Herbert Smith Freehills to look after their digital marketing and website. Really pleased that Alex is now a friend of Byfield, supporting us on some projects. So welcome, Alex, for your first Counsel Culture.
Hi, Linzi. Thanks for having me. It's nice to sort of get back out there into the wider industry.
Yeah, and how have you been? Certainly, we've kind of been sitting next to each other in the office this week, and you've been out and about and meeting people. Is it nice to reconnect with some old friends and some faces?
Yeah, it's really nice. But I spent sort of years as a sort of industry anorak, and you track things, you talk to people all the time. So, and even though you keep up with things when you're actually inside a law firm, you're working on projects. So it definitely feels like a crash course over the last couple of weeks to get out there, find out the news, talk to contacts, and knock the rust off, as it were. So it's you can feel old muscles that you haven't used for a while creep. But I'm really enjoying it.
Great. Well, yeah, it's really, really good to have you on board. And talking about, flexing those muscles, we're going to dive into some news stories this week. So it's been really, really good to get your perspective, obviously, as someone that was so close to the legal industry news, your perspective on some stories this week. So we're going to dive straight in. And first up, we have the RollOnFriday annual associate survey. Some pretty good figures in there. 68% satisfaction rate, as what was one of them that stood out to me. What does that tend to mean in practice, and how is that measured?
In the case of the RollOnFriday survey, which is something that I used to look at as a journalist, I mean, even though it's probably a little bit divisive in the industry, but it's a big respondent base. So it gets about 7,500 respondents. I think every year they run it, they get a lot, and I guess maybe 40,000 commercial lawyers in the UK. So that's a pretty sizable chunk. They grade satisfaction on 6 categories. I mean, obvious stuff: work-life balance, pay, and the key issue really is how they rank the individual firms. So I think they're ranking from 60 odd large firms that they get enough responses in. And having watched it over the years, you can see the patterns of who sits where or what kind of firms sit where, and how that's shifted and changed over the years. So, looking this year, you can see some firms ranking higher than you'd expect, and some firms not doing well, still not doing well, which, so the way that the law firms feel about that sort of shifts a bit. Some of them say they're not that bothered about this survey. Other people keep a close eye on it.
And we've seen from this year's results that the US firms seem to be doing better than in the past. I think there was a little bit of an imbalance between the elite firms, perhaps, and those which I think we've discussed as kind of more lifestyle firms. Is that something that you saw in the results this year?
The definite shift over the years, and even from, I mean, it used to be back in the day when they were first doing it that there was a stone cold trend that you could bank on, which was the lifestyle firms that weren't going to clock up as many hours. The pay and the work-life balance was different, would be generally ranking a lot higher. Your hard driving London firms, the Magic Circle, the top firms, they would rank not great. The sort of the bad associate ranks, as they're trying to make partner, would you'd see that trade-off. You get the pay, you get the prestige, I suppose. That's definitely seems to have broken down a bit. So if you look at the top rankings, you've definitely still got some lifestyle firms ranking really well. Your Burgess Salmons, who are always going to rank really well, but there's a lot of American firms that are highly profitable, would be seen as very prestigious. Paul Weiss, Debevoise, Aiken, Gunt, White and Case, they're all ranking up very highly. what is more predictable at the sort of lower end, and I think this is one of the things that people tend to look for in this survey, the firms who really rank poorly, and there's some they give it, I think they call it the golden turd for the firm who's right at the bottom.
Yeah. I remember that. It's aptly named. And it's obviously been going for a long time. Do you see a sense that this survey and its results have a genuine influence on where new talent is going, and do associates look out for this survey each year?
I think it's definitely in the mix. If you look at a Legal Cheek and a RollOnFriday, and they hit slightly different audiences and do slightly different things. They hit a sizable audience, and that they do have I think they definitely have an impact in how the market is seen. The associate survey itself, or the in RollOnFriday, sorry, it includes partners as well. That's probably a little bit divisive because people think whether the firms do or don't support it or encourage people to respond can have an impact on the ranking. And I've no reason to think that's not the case. You're always going to get respondent bias to a point, but it's still a pretty, it's one indicator of many. And the trick with these things is to look at them in the round. Firms that are persistently ranking very lowly, in my experience, there usually actually is an issue. It's pretty rare from somebody who used to report on the legal industry that you'd see firms who were really ranking terribly year on year, that you wouldn't see a reflection in the business and the culture and what was also going on in that firm. So people who just dismiss it because of issues to do with whether you can influence it, I think that's not a way that I would go, and it's almost certainly having some kind of an impact on how you're seen in the market.
Next up, some pretty eye-popping figures. Taylor Wessing's top earner reportedly taking 10.3 million. I think there's been a lot of articles comparing this level of pay to footballers, and all sorts of other high earners across different sectors. I guess we have to look at this in context, and I wondered, from your perspective, how much of an indicator, how accurate can these figures be based on the overall accounts, right?
There can be a lot of distortions in those figures, who's the top biller, because other disbursements or one-off payments can be in there. But it still also speaks to the fact that some firms have very wide spreads between what they pay entry-level partners and the top. And there's obviously been a shift, partly because of competing with American firms, to have a wider spread and be able to pay your stars a higher amount. I mean, even with any disbursements or additional payments, if that is the case, 10.3 is a fair old chunk of change. And that's up from 7.8 for the highest paid and a lowly 5.5 million 2 years ago. So I don't know how that individual got by.
I mean, it's certainly a signal to the market. I mean, what signal? I'm not sure, but what do you kind of, as ex-journalist, what does that kind of paint a picture of you regarding Taylor Wessing's strategy, and perhaps the power dynamics within the firm?
I mean, it's hard to imagine that there's not some kind of what do you call it, a star culture, or however you look at it. So I think there's a wider issue for how it impacts the firm, but in terms of those kind of pay deals, and it's a bit of a theme, I think, in this episode and some of the stories that we've highlighted, you can see some of the wider coverage that gets beyond the sort of legal goldfish bowl. These kind of pay deals, they are associated with different sectors, with finance, with private equity, and it touches on some of the other firms and the other issues. And in the time that I was looking at the industry, and then I was in a law firm, and I come back, I think some of the growth of American firms and some of these mega pay deals and the star hiring and the transfer deals between law firms for partners, there is a wider sort of consciousness, there is a wider attention on the legal sphere than there was even 5 years ago. And that's partly because of, I guess you could call it the Kirkland effect. And while Taylor Wessing is a very different firm by heritage, a deal like this is getting attention, and it does play into that. And of course, they are now limbering up for a US merger.
Yeah, and some pretty positive results just before that. So pretty good timing. How much does this timing matter? Do you think this is a bit of a confidence play and a signal to market, as well as just kind of the usual timing of financials coming out? Because we know it is the season coming up.
Yeah. I mean, the most significant figure in there isn't the PEP. You can shift that around, move that around. It's the 15% revenue increase for the UK business. So that takes them up to 281 million. And that is by definition, revenue, what's the phrase about, that's what really drives a business. That's the foundation that you're building on. Profitability has, assumptions, write-offs, and there's always a degree of abstraction in it. So a 15% revenue kick by any yardstick is very good to be taking into a merger, and that will give them more confidence. There is some profitability disparity between the two firms, and we'll come back to that merger a little bit later. But that looking at it as a business overall, that's the thing that really strikes out to me. That growth rate is organically is pretty rare.
Right, next up, Alex, you've picked a piece from law.com looking at how Magic Circle law firms have fared in the recent years. Plays quite well to your expertise.
Yeah, this comes back a bit. We talked a bit about how American firms have dramatically continued their sort of grip on the global legal market, and particularly London, and that trend has only sort of shifted dramatically from the time that I was reporting on the industry. And in many ways, the trends that were going were pretty obvious in the decade before. But I think for London's elite, the Magic Circle, whatever you want to call it, it's been a difficult period. And in some ways, I think that those challenges have gone on for 25 years. This has been a long time in the making, but particularly post-banking crisis. So this article in law.com, which I think is firm but fair, is looking at them individually, and the Cliff Notes version is it's not a good read for Allen and Overy Sherman post merger, and that's been a very troubled period, and the feeling is that hasn't really settled down yet. And Clifford Chance and Linklaters are also don't come up that well from it in terms of how they're positioned and how they're positioned with the states. The firm that they do give a thumbs up to is Freshfields, which has effectively Americanized itself in recent years and really plugged that US DNA right into its model, its partnership, its culture, in a way that I think was a model that was being kicked around sort of 7-8 years ago. And one thing that they really achieved was they committed to it. And that's something that so often holds back law firms. They just don't commit to one way or another, so they keep splitting the difference and hoping it's kind of fine. And they're law firms. They the industry grows, it's profitable, and so you get by, you have a career, and you're successful in many ways. But if you want to compete at the elite reaches of global law, it will have an impact. And I think one thing Freshfields has definitely had is just that clarity. They actually executed a strategy and they've stuck to it. And you can see definitely some ways that's paid off. Slaughter and May, that the piece is probably a little bit non-committal about, I think there are issues and questions and about Slaughter and May. That's not a new thing. That's been the case for years. So yeah, we'll see how that plays out.
For those firms that perhaps there is a more negative view of the brand pollution, do you consider this to be reversible? And I mean, what kind of fixes do these firms need to be thinking about? Is it, clarity of strategy, their culture? Is it the pay? Because I think, Magic Circle once meant the safe choice, and I'm unsure what kind of pieces like this do for reputations and for ultimately like client trust. Would you see there's a way back?
Yeah, I think you rightly brought it to what does it mean in terms of brand or reputation, and the magic circle was the shorthand for buying IBM in the legal industry. There's no doubt about that. And what companies getting at, and I think quite rightly, is that that's a lot more complicated now. And the associations are not, certainly not uniformly positive. I think clarity of what they're doing, clarity of response will help, but a lot of ground has been lost. I think that would feed through to a certain extent in terms of their reputation or their brand, or how they're projecting their story to the market. It just makes it easier to say, and people do, especially in the legal sector, it involves a lot of skeptical people, whether that's people in the industry, rivals, people reporting on you. Yeah, people can spot a certain degree of conviction, I think, and if you're saying something and it's broadly credible and you follow through on it. So I think the more that they can have clear decisions and execute on a path and go down that path with conviction, they will do better as a business, and I think they will do better in terms of the brand and communicating with people.
And last up, just coming back to Taylor Wessing, it was reported a few days ago now that the big merger has gone through. Apparently, overwhelming support from the partnership. So I'm sure both firms are very, very happy. What's your take on this?
Yeah, this news came out on Friday. So this is the Winston Strawn Taylor Wessing merger. So the vote's gone through. So they're in theory cleared to go live by the 1st of May. It's the same theory. Sometimes these things move a little bit, but the deal is stamped now. So that means the UK business, Taylor Wessing merges into Winston Strawn, and there are some deals in the pipeline. So Ireland, the Netherlands, and Belgium, I think, is expected to come in, and some of the other bits, most notably Germany, but also France and some Central and Eastern European operations are not part of the deal. So I think the widest significance is the Americanization of the legal market and the ripple effect of that. We had a run of mergers at the end of last year. Transatlantic mergers, Hogan Lovells and Cadwallader, Perkins Coie and Ashurst. Coie, actually, I think I always say that one wrong. Given how hard it is to do transatlantic mergers, and people have been hunting around for these deals for over 30 years. I mean, that's quite a run of deals, and deals at scale. And my former shop did the merger with Kramer 11 as well. So this is going to cause pressure for other people to look at what they're doing. That said, these deals are incredibly difficult to get, which is why there have been so few of them. So, I mean, is there going to be a wave of them? It's a lot easier said than done, but there will be more pressure and people will try and do it, and it could quite easily kick forward a few more deals. I mean, I'm not hearing any in the market as I'm speaking to contacts coming right now, but there's a lot of firms, there's a lot of American firms. It's a hugely deep market. So if somebody random comes up that you never thought of, and everyone says, wasn't that obvious? So in terms of this deal, this is an interesting one. You'll get a UK business of over $400 million. You'll get strong coverage in private client, IP, venture capital, and general disputes. I mean, the practice, the mix of the business looks workable. It doesn't look like a slam dunk. I mean, what this actual merger would typically boil down to, though, is goodwill and culture, especially with American firms. I mean, culturally, putting American firms together with UK firms is hard yards. You know, even if the business mix is great, it's getting the cooperation, getting the two sides to line up, especially with the partnership structure. It's not easy. So if it's hard to even do the deals, then making them work, and the track record of them, A&O, a very well managed firms, had its challenges with Sherman and Sterling. Clifford Chance back in the day had its struggles. So there's still going to be more churning in the market. There's going to be more pressure for American deals, and there'll be lots of eyes on this deal to see how it goes.
That's all for today. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Counsel Culture. And thank you, Alex, for being a fantastic and insightful guest. Look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.